This world of wargaming, Netwar, Abstraction, and levels of war. So I recently did a video, I think it was an off-the-shelf video on Decision Iraq, a modern war magazine war game here. So the question up front is, what does Netwar have to do with Operation Iraqi Freedom? And my point up front is that in my experience in Iraq, 13 months, 2004 to 2005, experiencing the rise of the insurgency, nowhere was Netwar present. Period. I mean, period. So, what did I miss? I don't think I missed anything, but what did I miss? What's going on here? How can't, by the way, this is not a game, it's not even a game critique. This is just a discussion actually about Netwar and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Yeah, this is not a, anyways. Well, I suppose if it is a negative, reflection on the game, well, I guess it is a negative reflection on the game. I don't know that yet. Haven't played it yet. But so I'm back up. When I did the off-the-shelf video, I pulled it out, looked over the magazine, looked over the rules, components and everything, set up the game. Netwar, the concept of Netwar, is a central pillar of this design. So, what's going on here? But I can ask, where did it come from? And I know where, first of all, I know what Netwar is. I'm saying Netwar wasn't on the ground in Iraq. Not when I was there. I know where Netwar came from, but I'm saying as a game, Decision Iraq, Operation Iraqi Freedom, where did Netwar come from? It's a rhetorical question. So, again, what did I miss? Okay, so I said I was in Iraq 2004 to 2005. First of all, that is clearly covered. That is clearly covered by the game. It is clearly covered in the game, period. So it would, my experience would correspond to these two turns right here. Make sure I got that right. Yep. Well, actually, it would stretch over these three, but, well, yeah. No, my experience would stretch over these three turns, okay? It would begin, no. Yeah. It would actually begin on the front end of this one and end on the front end of this one. Okay, anyways, clearly covered in the game, clearly. So it's not that I wasn't there, or it's not that this game is covering a time period that doesn't overlap with when I was there. Now, second of all, is it possible that obviously my experience as a platoon leader was at the squad level, platoon level, company level, battalion level, at the highest. This game is clearly way above that level, way above that level. So is it possible that Netwar was a factor at a higher level of war? I suppose that's an open question. I don't make that assumption for sure. I do not make the assumption that a concept is entirely present at one level of war and entirely absent at another level of war. That's just not again, that's not an assumption I make. So I'll leave that as an open question. Maybe. And as far as my experience, not only when I think back to looking around the operating environment, across the operating environment, not only was Netwar nowhere to be seen, my experience in Iraq was more like, had more, I don't know, it was more reminiscent of some things I've read about the First World War. And actually, I will go so far as to say that my experience in Iraq was had more to do with really World War II combat than 21st century warfare as presented by writers, in some case defense contractors. You see, there's an underlying theme here, and that is that it has been my experience, it is my opinion that my experience in Iraq, which I don't consider to be especially unique, let me make that clear, is not captured very well at all. It's not captured very well at all in books and etc. As a matter of fact, I tend to think that the real experience on the ground in Iraq, especially the early period of the insurgency, before the surge, basically, reality has not been well explored and presented. Actually, I consider it to be the first few years to be a forgotten war within the larger war in Iraq. War in Iraq, not a forgotten war at all. But the first few years, I do consider to be a forgotten war within the larger conflict. And by the way, when I say that my experience on the ground had more to do with World War I and even more to do with World War II than any futuristic 21st century concept of conflict, combat, operations, whatever, that is to say two things. One, that's to say that war today is not, again, the hybrid, futuristic mumbo jumbo presented by so many what's an acceptable term? Theorist? That's to say war today has way more continuity with the past than you will get, again, from a lot of writers. And understand, this is to say that one should cut through the academic biases of writers and certainly cut through the monetary, monetary interests and, frankly, agenda of some writers who are pushing concepts that lead to commercial contracts. Cut through all that, and I think one finds a whole lot more continuity with the past than breaks with the past. Okay. Yeah, I've been a little oblique there, but I just haven't decided how I want to I haven't decided how I want to present all of these ideas fully. I just know that this game right here is bringing this to light. This game is a spotlight on what I'm talking about. Now, I've said before that, you know, if I were going to do, so this covers 2004, really 2003, but I will not include 2003 in here. But 2004 to 2008. If I were going to make a simulation game on that, it just would be very different, to say the least. And I don't mean just different, I mean very different. I mean fundamentally different. So anyways, that is what it is, right? We should have entirely different portrayals of the conflict. I'm not saying that this is that this should be discounted or is illegitimate or anything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that this, wow. Oh, you know what? Let me bring this back. Look, this is the significance of what I'm talking about. I'm saying if a leading war game designer can design a game on a war in Iraq and make Netwar, the concept of Netwar, a central design pillar, and I as a gamer approach the game with some personal first-hand experience of what's in the game, what's covered in the game, and I am utterly aghast at the design choices, well, specifically the Netwar concept. I mean, this is like being in a fun house. This doesn't look anything like, again, I'm saying conceptually, okay, conceptually, it's like, what? Netwar in Iraq, 2004 to 2000, what? It's okay. I mean, I'll take the design as presented, but, well, you're really making me stretch my understanding. So the point is, this is what this has to do with. This experience, my experience with this, cast doubt on all wargame designs. Yes, I said that. I said it cast doubt on all wargame designs. Now, with some games, the doubt is more, and with some games, the doubt is less. But with this experience, I mean, there's always some doubt that, and again, I don't think it's designers so much, not developers so much. I don't think it's producers so much. I'm saying it's fans of some Napoleonic battle game system that insist and argue on and on and on about how some particular game system presents, the reality of Napoleonic battle so accurately. Well, I have to ask myself, if we could resurrect a Napoleonic veteran, a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars, a veteran of Napoleonic battles, and show them these designs, you think maybe they might have the type of intellectual, might have the same reaction that I have with Netwar in Iraq, and then fans of World War II squad level game system, insisting that it's so realistic about the experiences of Second World War soldiers. Really? Anyways, cast doubt, and this is by the way, this is not a bad thing. It's not good that games, capture the truth, and it's not bad that's well, basically so difficult to do. It's more just, it is what it is. And one, it is what it is, and two, and I really do back this approach. We need different and thought-provoking designs so that we do not become complacent in our frankly smug little beliefs in the experiences of soldiers in the past, the reality of war and combat and blah, blah, blah. So this, you know, the designer puts Netwar into Iraq. That is a interesting idea. I happen to, you know, not ascribe to it, but this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing. You know, it is thought-provoking, by the way. And let me bring up another point why I even pulled this out and am doing this. So again, I came away from this first look at this game really scratching my head like, wow, where did this come from? And I genuinely said, okay, did I miss something? I mean, I have my experience. I went on to spend way more time in Afghanistan. So I know my focus was more on Afghanistan than Iraq, but still, I mean, I thought I was keeping a general, you know, professional eye on what was going on in Iraq. Did I miss something, though? And just recently, in my professional reading, as a professional military strategist, I was reading a paper. I think it was a SAMS monograph, but it may have been a CGSC monograph, but I believe it was a SAMS monograph on breaking the phalanx. I think that was the paper I was reading, and in it, the author goes into a discussion of Netwar, the Netwar ideas, really focusing on the 1998 to 2000, 2001, 2002 time frame. So right before this. And okay, how do I put this fairly? Netwar was a concept, at least, although I think people would argue that it was way more than just a concept. It was a concept used to push, and I don't mean that in a bad way, it's reality. It was a concept used to drive a bunch of changes, and a lot of those changes had to do, again, with contracts, technological contracts. Not exclusively, but they were there. Anyways, so thumbnail sketch that I was reminded of from this monograph I was reading recently is how Netwar was never, and of course people will argue about this, Netwar was never wholeheartedly adopted. There were always Netwar critics, and by 2001, 2002, this again is an idea, you know, clearly debatable. But by 2001, 2002, Netwar was really being pushed to the back burner. So how does a designer resuscitate Netwar that was, and I'm going to say, as a concept, it was in decline? Again, some people argue with that. I'm on the side that says it was in decline as we went into Iraq. Did something happen in Iraq to, you know, significantly revive this waning concept? I don't think so. I don't think so. But anyways, something to look at. Something to look at. Thought-provoking. It drives self-study and debate, and constructive debate, hopefully. So, levels of war. I made a discovery that I want to relate for what it's worth. No idea whether this is, you know, worth recording or not. Just don't know. Okay, so I say I am not a native of wargaming. I am not a native. I am a transplant. What do I mean by that? I mean wargamers who came into the hobby during their formative years, whatever those are for you. If wargamers who came into the hobby during their formative years and stuck with it over a very long period of time, over a long period of time, become enculturated to the hobby. They learn the lingo. They use the lingo like a second language. And really, they do internalize a paradigm. Yes, there is a wargaming paradigm. I'm not saying it's so interesting to consider, but I do believe and have seen there's a wargaming paradigm for sure. Again, how significant it is, I don't know. That's something to talk about, I guess. So when I think of a native to wargaming, is a person who has become a naturalized citizen of wargaming. A native of wargaming knows the traditions, and they really are like traditions. They know the artifacts. Yes, I mean artifacts in an archaeological, in a modern anthropology or cultural anthropology sort of way. They've internalized the worldview, etc., etc. Me, I'm a transplant. So 1980, I believe, 1980 or so, yes, I did. I was introduced to war games, and for the next few years, to say it most charitably, I dabbled. I dabbled in war games, and then I moved on to other things. I always did keep a tiny foot in the computer wargaming world, but anyways, I never spent enough time in wargaming of any kind to, in my opinion, become enculturated and become a native. So 6 years ago, when I started, when I took up this hobby full time, it was clearly as an outsider, and so launching into all of these ongoing and in some cases very heated discussions that make up the social aspect of wargaming was interesting, and it was confusing too. I do not want to overemphasize the confusion. It was just a low-grade fever of confusion. So let's take the levels of war. In all these discussions I launched into, wargamers are arguing what's the strategic level, what's the operational level, what's the tactical level, what's grand tactical, what's grand operational. I never heard the term grand operational until wargaming. And I'm a military professional. Never grand operational. Anyways, yeah, okay. Not saying it isn't something legitimate. Let's just add grand to everything. Wargamers are arguing over these things, and whether the arguments are worthwhile or not, I don't know. But what's clear, especially for an outsider, is how people keep talking past each other. Okay. So the first thing I recognize is, whoa, the bulk of wargamers have a completely different view of strategic, operational, and tactical as compared to my use of these terms and understanding these terms. Now, where did mine come from? Mine came directly, specifically, and without a doubt from military doctrine. So there is a US/Western definitional structure of these levels of war. Yes, there are some caveats about, overlapping and so on and so forth. But a lot of doctrinal energy and writing has been devoted to this issue. And by the way, let me say that for professional military, these three terms, just these three terms, let alone the proliferation of other variant terms, strategic, operational, tactical, need to have definitions. It can't be, as a military professional, it cannot be entirely slipshod in our use of these terms. That's not to say that these are, that these are some type of, religious pronouncements, okay? But when we have discussions of tactical, operational, strategic, professional discussions in the military, we need to have some fairly clear idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so that's that. Set that aside. So I come to wargaming with my military definitions of strategic, operational, and tactical. First thing's obvious. Whoa, wargamers are doing something completely different. What's going on here? And I'm following these discussions over the last few years, and it's like, where are people getting this? Where are people getting these ideas? Is it from their favorite games? I don't know, but there definitely seems to be, hanging in the background of these discussions, there definitely seems to be again, this goes back to the acculturation part. There seems to be an accepted view again. There seems to be an accepted view of these three definitions, these levels of war, with some variation. All right, some war gamers might put the line here, others put it there, others put it here, but basically there seems to be an accepted concept here, framework. Where'd it come from? I don't know. Anyways, lo and behold, this is to me, this is hilarious. Actually, I'm reading these old magazines recently, and one of these palm to the forehead moments. Oh my! Look at that. So, this is Moves magazine from way back when. We're talking early 70s. And way back in the feedback section. Clearly, an entire generation of wargamers were enculturated with this. All the other stuff related to this, right? And then I contend that generation passed on, again, social knowledge to succeeding generations. And right here, SPI, this is SPI, isn't it? God, it was SPI. Yeah, SPI. All right. SPI Moves magazine. Right here. There are 3 scales we use. Tactical, up to 500 men per unit, up to 1,000 meters per hex. Each turn represents less than an hour of real time. Let me just tell you that definition of tactical isn't even in the ballpark of the military definition. But this definition is very specific. Very specific. Operational, up to brigade, or 10,000 men, unit size, up to 5 kilometers per hex, and usually 1 day per turn. Again, that isn't even in the ballpark of the military definition of operational. And strategic, everything larger. Wow. Now, game after game after game that I've seen is sold as, advertised as, and accepted as a strategic game. The vast majority are not strategic games. Not by any type of, again, military definition sense, which again is separate. I'm not saying the hobby, and I'm going to get to this, the hobby doesn't have to conform to the professional military. I'm just pointing out first. And this is the disconnect that somebody like me, not being a native, comes in, and I'm trying to figure out what in the heck are people talking about. These are not strategic games. Well, they are strategic games if you use this definition. So this was an aha moment. Wow, this, I suspect, now there might be other sources, but this has got to be, I say, this has got to be one of the sources of this, again, cultural knowledge that defines these tactical, operational, and strategic terms in the way that wargamers still do today. Now, why does it even matter? I can only think of one significant way that it matters, and I'll talk about this again. If wargaming is going to remain an amateur hobby, an amateur pastime, then none of this matters. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. Like any other amateur hobby, the people within the amateur hobby can define terms how they want. They can define concepts how they want. You know, amateur pastime wargamers can look at the past however they want. It doesn't matter because it's just a pastime. Now, I do think, especially looking back through the history of hex and counter war games, overlapping with the history of miniatures wargaming, reading yet another paper the other day on Kriegspiel and the history of that type of wargaming. Clearly, if nothing else, there's always been a segment of the hobby that has been trying to aspire to something more than just an amateur hobby pastime. And by the way, I am in that group. I would like to see, I don't think this is the first time I've mentioned this, I would like to see wargaming, simulation gaming, conflict gaming, elevated to what I would say is a semi-professional level. I don't pretend to want to go to the professional level, but semi-professional, yes. And to do that, a group of participants, the people who are going to take it to the semi-professional level, there are things you have to do. And one of those things you have to do is you have to clean up your language. You'll never graduate from the Tower of Babel situation you have in amateur wargaming if you don't clean up your language. I hope that's obvious, because basically you just keep having these same arguments go round and round and around as people use different, are leaning on different ideas, different perceptions, perspectives, people talking past each other, and you just can't make heads from tails, really, at the end of the day. It might all be interesting. I would hope that it, would spur more self-study, reading, whatever, but wargaming itself is not going to advance, I guess. Okay, so that's so like me as a military professional, I guess why this matters is, again, I've said before, I just said I'm not a native. I'm coming into wargaming. I will stay in wargaming, but I'm a military professional, so I can't abandon my professional definitions of strategic, operational, tactical. So am I gonna use two languages, the professional military language that I use every day, and then have a wargaming language separate? I'm sure there are many people who would choose to do that. I don't do that, which is why the issue of these terms, why the issue of terminology is going to keep coming up, at least for somebody like me. At least I understand. I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, I didn't even understand where wargamers were getting their conception of strategic, operational, and tactical. At least now I have a much better understanding. Hey, isn't that it's probably the best that can come out of this little bit here. I understand better now where wargamers get their concept of the levels of war. By the way, not very helpful. These definitions of levels of war, they might help a company with their commercial output, but I'll tell you, conceptually, these definitions of levels of war are actually very problematic, but that's a whole nother discussion. Related to that is confusion of very key foundational terms and concepts. Realistic versus reality. Not only do they mean different things, they're actually opposite meanings. So to have a discussion where you have both sides of a discussion going round and around and seemingly unknowingly flowing back and forth between talking about reality versus realistic, it's incredibly confusing when you consider what the terms mean. And when I say terms, I'm talking about broader, not the little wargaming amateur pastime world. Again, it's an amateur pastime. People can define terms any way they want, and it creates a Tower of Babel situation. Tower of Babel situation. And here it is. You know, I don't know how many times I've been frustrated with discussions about abstraction. I started just recounting the number of times that I saw people use the word abstraction in a way that is completely unrelated to its normal English definition. It's not even close, so people would say they're talking about a war game. They're talking about a war game and they're saying, oh, well, that's an abstraction. Or that game has too much abstraction. Or that game, I like that game because it has a certain level of abstraction. Wargamers are talking about games and they keep using the word abstraction in a way that doesn't, well, it's interesting to say the least, because the term abstraction means to, given a reality of many, many, many different factors that go into a real situation, not made up, but a real situation. Abstraction is to take a factor or a small piece of that out and to have that smaller subset represent the larger, more complex reality. So let's see how it has been put. Let's see how it's been put. The process of selecting the essential aspects of a simulation to be represented in a model or simulation while excluding those aspects that are not relevant to the purpose of the model or simulation. The set of elements produced by this process. This idea comes from the DoD, Department of Defense, U.S. Department of Defense Modeling and Simulation Glossary. Okay, so I'm saying, or I will say, we have 3 levels, and level is probably the wrong term, but in concreteness, I'll say 3 levels. First is the general concept of abstraction, which I just mentioned. Then we have this, which is a little more specific, this process of selecting essential aspects. So before, when I talked about kind of the general English language concept of abstraction, is one thing. Now this is getting a little more specific. You're selecting essential aspects of the simulation. Again, all those factors. This DoD simulation and modeling concept means you're going to look at all these factors that go into the real circumstances that you want to model or simulate. Remember, modeling and simulation are not the same thing. They're kind of nested, yes, but they're not the same. Okay, so you're in this concept, you're going to pull out the essential aspects, which the underlying assumption here is that if you pull out the essential aspects, you can still accurately model and simulate while in some way simplifying the complexity of the reality. This is okay with me, by the way. Now we go to an entirely different. Now consider this. Key concept in war games, whereby complex procedures in a historical event are much simplified in a war game of the same event. This comes from James Dunnigan, the technical terms used in wargaming. Okay. These are two totally different levels to keep in mind, right? DoD modeling and simulation, international audience, United States Department of Defense modeling and simulation. Dunnigan, a commercial producer of amateur war games. This is the idea that I think I see over and over and over again in wargaming. Socializing, and this is not a useful definition at all. This is an amateur hobby definition, which doesn't even nest with, well, it doesn't nest enough in my mind with the two higher concepts. So this is not, I kept following these discussions, and somebody says, oh, that's abstraction. And I'm thinking to myself, no, that's not abstraction. You're talking about simplification. And guess what? Simplified is in the concept as written out in black and white. Simplification isn't included in the higher concepts. Interesting. Anyways, enough for now.